While we're waiting to get started, I could offer a couple overview comments on the state of the watershed from my perspective as a hydrogeologist. I'm Russell Urban Mead. For those of you who don't know me, we've made it through a very long dry summer. NOAA tells us that we're out of the abnormally dry weather condition, which was at our margins for much of the summer. It was mostly right at the Connecticut border and extending into New England and covered the North Country and Western New York. But the sort of greater Hudson Valley was never quite in it, but as we knew from our stream flow systems, things were very dry. We seem to be out of that. November 30, many of you will remember, we had various rainfalls in different places, but close to my house, we had 2¼ inches of rain. That's a very heavy rain, and really effectively ended the summer drought. We were followed up by another 1/3 of an inch or so last Saturday. All our stream flows are back sort of in the normal range, median flows for what you'd expect at this time of year. The dry summer, in all likelihood, is over. Gauging programs that we're involved with are showing aquifer rebound, as you would expect in the fall anyway, but emphasized by this change in the weather. So those are a couple comments on the watershed status from my perspective as I think about them. I see the streams as our arbiters of groundwater condition. If the streams are up, it's not just overland flow, it's the underland flow, as I call it, the groundwater emerging, supporting the stream flow. And November, for those of you following the climate media discussion, it looks like it was our warmest November on record. And that if December follows suit, 2020 may nudge 2016 as the warmest record on world climate patterns. So those are a couple comments. Welcome to the Watershed Alliance breakfast here. I've volunteered to organize or be part of the organizing team for these for many years. In the Zoom format, many more of you are able to join us, which is wonderful. We would normally be at a diner in New Paltz, shoulder to shoulder, ordering eggs and sharing coffee and gaining that sort of collegiality, which is another important part of what it means to be a community. I'm sorry, we can't do that today, but the flip side is that we have more people here than we would normally have able to show up at 8:30 in the morning in New Paltz. Emily Vale, you should jump in. You're our executive director of the Watershed Alliance and have some announcements.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks again for joining us. So just wanted to recap, we had our annual Watershed Conference back in October. We've got some of the sessions that are posted online, along with many of the previous talks from our breakfast lecture series are on our YouTube channel. So if you missed some talks and you want to get caught up, please go check us out there. I also wanted to mention that we just finished our 2020 annual report, and although this has been truly a wild year with a lot of hardships, it's really been a year of growth for the Hudson River Watershed Alliance. And thanks to online programs, we've been able to reach so many more of you. I know there are people who are tuning in much further from New Paltz than driving distance. So thanks so much for joining us. You can check out our annual report. I'll put a link to that in the chat. And also we're in the middle of our annual appeal. So if you are able to donate to the Hudson River Watershed Alliance to support this work that we do to unite and empower communities to protect their water resources, we really appreciate your support. No amount is too small. So I wanted to acknowledge a couple of our Hudson River Watershed Alliance board members that are in the Zoom today. We've got Mary McNamara, Michael Finewood, and Dan Shapley, along with, of course, our speaker, Eli Dueker. So, and
our prior board president, Simon Gruber.
Yes. Good morning, Simon.
Eli Dueker, we're so pleased to have you here today. Grabbing a few items from your bio, you're an assistant professor of environmental and urban studies at Bard College. Got your PhD at Columbia, did some postdoc work at Queens College. So you know this region extremely well. You've done a number of important years of work in the nonprofit world around a range of issues, including race, class, and gender issues. You lead an exciting program at Bard. You're a tenured faculty member. And you do a lot of amazing outreach with the Saw Kill Watershed Community, which has its mission to protect the Saw Kill Watershed and its ecology and water resources and historic resources. That intersection of academia and citizen action and the path to policy change and protection is a fabulous part of the mission of the Watershed Alliance, and we're just delighted to have you here today. Thank you for joining us, and the time is yours until 9:30. For those of you who know me in the audience, you know that at 9:30 we shut down sharp on time so that you can be on your way to other things. So Eli, thank you so much, and we're delighted to have you here today.
Well, thank you, Russell, and thank you so much, Emily, for having me. I really appreciate the invitation to speak, and also I want to apologize again to everyone out there who tried to come on in November when I completely messed up the times. It was actually like one of my real nightmares that I would show up to a talk after it was supposed to happen. Thankfully, unlike my nightmares, I had clothes on. So I am here now, and I'm really happy and humbled to be asked actually to be the last omelet for this really amazingly interesting year. So I'm here to help you wrap up 2020 in terms of the omelets, and I, like all of you, most likely are really looking forward to 2021. 2020 can't end fast enough. So I'm talking to you about water science for water communities. And before I get started, I just wanted to be sure to outline here this little statement I have. Basically, every presentation I give, no matter if it's completely all about scientific jargon or if it's actually something that's accessible and understandable, it is actually an integration of the work of many, many people, some of whom I know, some who I don't, but always everything that comes out of my mouth is actually put together from a long, long list of people who I'm eternally grateful for, and hope that I can do more to figure out who they are, because there are so many folks that contribute to this work who remain invisible. I have this picture here on the top here. This is an activist from Flint, Michigan, who was fundamental in bringing national attention and, most importantly, regulatory attention to the water crisis that occurred in Flint years ago, where there were insane amounts of lead in the drinking water. And I'm showing her, she's holding water that came out of her tap. And I'm showing her here with an arrow towards many of the fish that we all know and love and hold dear, because I, in this talk, want to try my best to convince you that if we were to centralize people and their needs and their health, instead of centralizing the needs of fish and their health on our waterway, that we would be able to create a great and healthy ecology for our fish, while also making really long-term changes that are sustainable and supported by all people. Okay, so when I'm a professor, which means I talk a lot, and I like to define everything that I talk about. I don't like to make assumptions about what people are attributing to certain keywords, and so I'm gonna be a professor here and define most of these keywords from this slide here. First, what is community? When I talk about community, I mean all people. And the difference between all people and community is the work that is done specifically in a community to build trust. This is an image from the March for Science that occurred right after Trump was elected president. And I really like this picture because this is all folks that are gathered for science. So we are the scientific community here. And like the scientific community, you can see people are heading off in all different directions. And we also have different signs here. We have demand data-driven decision-making next to the earth has music for those who listen, okay? This is the March for Science. So these are different ways of thinking about science, different ways for thinking about the work that we do as scientists, and folks have different ideas in different directions. As you can see in the center here is a transgender microbiologist with science as their superpower, and that's me. So I'm a biological oceanographer by training from Columbia University. I went to Columbia because it was on the Hudson River, and I've always really been focused on water quality issues and the ways that humans engage with water. And in the United States, New York City is probably the highest density of people along a waterway that you can find. I'm trained as a biological oceanographer. I'm an environmental microbiologist in practice. I'm also a human. And as I do my science, like every scientist, although I do my best to approach things in an unbiased manner and try to think in an unbiased manner, I am who I am. And so it's important to me that you know that I'm a scientist, but I'm also a transgender man who has 2 kids, has a family, and also is very active in my large Catholic family, which I'm the oldest of 7. Part of my family are Trumpians, part of my family are not. So I have, my context is a unique context, but also it just makes me human, and it gives me perspectives when I go to do my science that are unique to me. When I am speaking to you and sharing what I know, I'm trying my best to be accountable as a community member in the scientific community, the watershed communities, my family, my friends, the environmental justice community, the queer community, in which I have done a lot of activism, and academia. I am lucky as a transgender professor to have tenure. There are not a lot of us out there. And it's something that I am keenly aware of and do not take for granted. My philosophy as I'm speaking with you really is that that healthy people equal a healthy planet. And that the really key piece here is to understand that it is not the other way around. And we'll talk about that more. And so my strategy in all of this, my evil plan, if you will, is that if we put together water science with water communities, real communities that have built trust, we come out with better science and better communities, and eventually the healthy people that I'm striving for. Okay, before I go any further though, I may have dressed as a superhero here. This is the Wonder Twins. And this is my sister here, who is a developmental psychologist. She is a full professor, which I am not yet, and she's my little sister, but that's okay. I may have dressed as a superhero here, but I am definitely not a superhero. And when I speak about things like working on change and figuring out different ways of approaching science and community, I'm speaking from a place of being in the midst of that work and learning as I go. All right, so that's community, and I want to say also that as I'm speaking here, it might be good for you to think about. Here we are in a community. It is on Zoom. It is a little bit awkward. We cannot be ordering eggs right now, but we are a part of a community, and that's why we're all here. And so thinking about for yourself, who are you in this community, and who are you accountable in this community? Who are you accountable to? And also, how can we build more trust amongst each other across the different ways that we participate in this community? Okay, so what is water? We all know that water is 2 hydrogens and an oxygen, H2O. And when you look at this slide, ask yourself, where is the water on this slide? The answer is everywhere, everywhere, in the clouds, in the oceans, in the land, water everywhere. So it's a really powerful and intimidating thing to be working on. When we protect water in one place, we are protecting water for the entire globe at all times. And then the next question I want to answer is, what is science? Because science is a term that we all, well, I often take for granted, but I even looked it up in Wikipedia, and here is what Wikipedia had to say. Science meaning is from the Latin word scientia, meaning knowledge, is a systematic enterprise that builds and organizes knowledge in the form of testable explanations and predictions about the universe. I think it's important that the term science is based on a term that was knowledge, because in this day and age in particular, we are all really clear how knowledge is power, and also knowledge and science have become political. This is a really important thing to understand, because trust has been broken around how science is a functional part of society, and how it is something that can help us move forward in good ways for all. And that is something that I really am hoping to work on, and I have some ideas that I'm going to share with you. If you have any questions about just how political science is, even after this election, I don't know if you've been keeping up with what's happening right now with scientists, but there is a top AI ethics researcher at Google has recently been let go because of her work showing that the really humongous language models that Google is developing and modeling their artificial intelligence on is mostly from white and Western countries, and that the language models themselves are maybe unwittingly recreating racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia for these AI models. That's Dr. Timnit Gebru has. And so if you have questions about that, take a look at that. That's huge. Also, Rebecca Jones, who's the data scientist in Florida, who recently had her home raided, her kids and partner had guns pointed at them because she was busy documenting real COVID numbers in Florida. These are really serious things that are happening right now. And it's never become more important to try to address the politicization of science. All right, so what is science? Well, there's many different ways to communicate science. I think we are trained in one way to recognize science, but I think that that's something that is really limiting our capacity to actually bring the full level of knowledge that humans as a species have when we only recognize science in a certain way. So I want to use this example. This is an example, has to do with water, of course. This is an example of a representation of the knowledge that we've gathered probably in the last 30 or 40 years. We've really synthesized this and integrated this. The knowledge that we've gathered from Western science in terms of what the atmosphere of early Earth moving to present was made of. What gases really dictated the atmosphere of the Earth over the history of time starting about 5 billion years ago, okay? And so this is a percentage of gases in the air, in the atmosphere, on the y-axis here, and on the x-axis is time moving towards the present, okay? And you can see that, that early on, there's a lot of ammonia and methane in the atmosphere, and also there's a lot of water vapor in the atmosphere. Over time, the water vapor disappears in the atmosphere, and that's because it became the ocean. And so then we get the rise of carbon dioxide, and then around about 2 billion years ago, we get the rise of oxygen, and that's because cyanobacteria, the algae in the oceans, began to produce enough oxygen to escape the waters and create the oxygenated atmosphere we have now. right? So this might be something that's familiar with some of you, maybe not for all. This is another way of representing that same thing, but this comes from about 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. This is taken from Zuni mythology. The Zuni peoples are in southwestern New Mexico. They're a federally recognized tribe in the United States. Here is what they had to say, and they've had to say for thousands of years. In the beginning, there was only moisture, which became clouds. The great Father's Son, the creator, Awana Walona, thickened the clouds into water that then formed a great sea. With his own flesh, Awana Walona fertilized the sea and green algae over it. The green algae produced the earth and sky. The marriage of earth and sky and the action of the sun on the green algae produced all living things. So if you put this together, to me, this is a really, really powerful demonstration of how our one way of looking at science has robbed us of the capacity to actually understand what's going on around us. It has limited our capacity to understand that science has been conducted from the beginning of human time, and that science can be communicated in many different ways. And if you take a look at this statement here with this overlay, you will see that there was only moisture, that the clouds thickened and became a great sea, and then the green algae produced all life. So I want to leave you with that, and we're going to move into defining other things. But I think this is a really important piece to consider. When we limit our willingness to see science in many different ways, we limit our capacity to make good decisions. We limit our capacity to really benefit from the full human experience of this earth. Okay, so what does healthy people equal healthy planet mean? What does that mean to me? What that means is that if we work towards having all people have equal access to health, healthy environment, healthy being, then we actually are going to end up with the same things that we all are working on now. But we don't have to start with redwoods. We don't have to start with fish. We can actually start with people and get to the same place. So the first case, I understand that this may not be something that everyone agrees with, so I'm just gonna try my best to convince you. The first case I'm gonna show here is air. Air is important. We all breathe it. It's the fluid that we interact with most. Air also, unsurprisingly, if it's not clean, can kill people. And we've been learning really in a stark manner since COVID arrived that chronic exposure to bad air quality, which is largely from pollution coming from energy production, oil-based energy production, is actually a huge reason that some communities are dying faster than others from COVID. If we were to have started working on this issue first, we would still have arrived at, or would arrive at, protecting the redwoods. However, and I will admit to this myself, this is how I started. I really loved those redwoods and hugged them all the time. But there was a point where I realized that maybe hugging trees might be easier, but we need to figure out how to take care of humans first. The second case I would say is water, and that's what we're all working on here. That's why we're gathered in community together here. And I think we all are aware that water has been a huge issue in many different ways. The Hudson has suffered, people have suffered, and it's really important to remember that even now, in 2020, over 3.4 million people die each year in the world from water-related diseases, which is almost the entire city of Los Angeles every year. And these water issues are things that we know full well how to address. We just haven't achieved that. And so I'm mentioning Newburgh and the water crisis that has occurred there. I also want to mention the Hudson Valley Environmental Justice Coalition had an amazing speaker this last time, Catherine Flowers, who has done so much amazing work around bringing to light that diseases that we in the health system and scientists in the United States, we like to think that certain diseases have been removed from the United States, but they are here with us, and that tropical diseases and diseases of poor sanitation happen across the United States, and that is something that we really need to be working on, and water is the primary way that those are transferred. So if we think about that, and we were to have started here working on issues around people, I think we would have gotten further. But and we would have ended up with the same result, which is making the waters better for the fishes and the mammals that live there. And so this is these are some cases, there's so many that demonstrate that what is killing whales and dolphins is also what is killing us. So I like to, and also I'm a really well-trained PhD. So I tell people what I'm going to tell them, and then I tell you, and then I'm going to tell you what I told you. This is the tell you what I'm going to tell you part of it. Also, I am probably getting a bit notorious about running over time and not being able to get to everything. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you all the things that I hope you take away from my presentation. You do not have to agree with everything. And please, if there's not time today to discuss or debate with me, feel free to contact me. I would love to talk about this more. So I want to just make it clear that I feel we're on the verge of pressing a massive reset button, not just politically, but we have a lot of work to do because science has not been enough to make the changes that we need to make environmentally. Laws also have not been enough, and clearly some of them are easily ignored. As I've said, trust has been broken. And we really need a strategy for moving forward on water stewardship. How are we going to do this when we don't have a functioning EPA? How are we going to do this? We need to think about who has the knowledge, who has the power, and figure out if those aren't the same people, how do we connect them? So I would submit we need new strategies for these unprecedented times. And we need to be really clear. And I think in the last couple of years, we've gotten a little confused as a community around the difference between regulation and stewardship. I want to be clear that all the hardworking people of DEC and EPA, no matter how hard they work, they're not going to be able to achieve the equitable access to shared resources that we actually need in our communities. They cannot do that without our really important and vigilant participation. I think that also we really need to shift our perspectives from is it safe to swim and are we protecting the fish to are we all healthy and do we all have access to clean water, drinking water, water that we can recreate in, water that's under the ground. And also I would argue water that's in the air. And we'll talk about that a little bit. We need to put people first. And we need to move our citizen science into true community science that is functional, defensible, and active. And yes, I keep talking about air. And I want to just remind us all that we're all frontline communities when it comes to water and air. Every single person on this call and all the people that we are around and care about, we're all a part of that community, no matter what our roles are. And I think what we need to move into is an understanding that community science, different ways of knowing and observing our waterways, different ways of preserving that or conserving that or cleaning that, that's our early warning system from the community level. We're all a part of that. And I think it is reasonable and important that we demand attention and action from elected officials and tax-supported institutions like the EPA and DEC when we observe and document an issue. We should never agree to rules that restrict our capacity to make and communicate those observations. And I am specifically referring to the ELAP requirements that have in the last couple of years come down. We should not let ELAP be the way that we determine what's happening in our waterways. There's a place for ELAP, but there's also a really much more important place for communities' capacity to engage with and care for their waterways. So when I say that we're all on the front line, we all breathe, we all drink water. But I did this this little march back to history to think about what are the ways that we communicate to each other that we're all on the front line. And so I found some of these comics that are from years ago, and I found it's kind of interesting. So this is from Bush era, the first time there was a stolen election. And here is someone saying, so outside the people, the water, the air, and the land, how's the world doing? And we've got all the things that are happening. And, you know, this was a while ago. Bush EPA eases pollution rules, right? Go to the next one. This is a really interesting representation of kind of what was going on when Flint happened. We've got EPA in action here, which I think is really important to understand because that was during Obama years. So I think we need to think about the fact that EPA actually hasn't been as functional as it could have been for a very long time now, and it's not necessarily a partisan situation. Then we move to now. The water is undrinkable, the air is unbreathable, and the ground is contaminated. Mission accomplished with Scott Pruitt, right? So I think it's interesting that you look at these three different partisan eras, and we have kind of the same message. And I think that is because the trust is broken in science, the trust has been broken with the government, and we as community members have not actually been able to engage in ways that we should have around taking care of our shared resources. But when I say we, I really want to bring something up here. And I use we a lot. I'm trying my best to be better at defining it. But I'm actually, while we all are on the front line, maybe we need to redefine the front line because it isn't actually all of us that are actually on the front line. Because here is a representation of what's happening in the protests around the Dakota Access Pipeline. Many of us, I'm sure, have heard about the folks, the indigenous communities primarily, that are actually the front line, and they are standing up to these major power centers saying, we need clean water. So when we talk about the we in the Hudson River watershed, I think it's important to understand that we are fighting to protect shared resources that are on indigenous homelands that actually have had indigenous stewardship for thousands of years before we took this on. And people, indigenous nations, they're integral to our water communities, although I would argue they are not as present as they should be. These nations have scientific and historical knowledge and experience that not a single United States scientist has that I have run into that's working on these issues right now. And it's probably because I have my circles of US scientists and I have not branched out to understand the full extent of indigenous science. It's something that I'm working on unlearning as we speak. And so I would argue that even though the drivers might be different right now, indigenous communities have scientific knowledge, like the Zuni myth, that is based on experience around climate change. That is not something any of us have. And I think we're really missing out around scientific knowledge that might be helpful in being good stewards of this land. And before, so having said this, I think it's really important to understand that there's a lot of self-education we all can do around this, because let's be frank, we were lied to or not told the truth in schools. The other thing is that if we are interested in engaging more effectively with indigenous communities whose land this is, we need to figure out first, before we do that, how to educate ourselves, and also how to come to that come to that interaction with something to offer. And there are examples, many examples that we could look at. One I think is really great, comes from Soulfire Farms. They are working on what they call cultural respect easements. That means that they are truly sharing the land and the stewardship of that land with the peoples whose homeland it is. So we have some work to do, but I feel excited and also encouraged that actually there are folks out there that know what to do right now, even though we all might feel that we don't know. Okay, so let me just, I like images, and I like kind of diagrams. It helps me, hopefully it'll help you. But so what I'm talking about is trying to bring all of us together as a community. And I'm talking about using science as the tool to do that. We've got our community of users, we've got our decision makers, and our environmental scientists. And even in each of these little corners of the triangle, folks don't actually, they're not really tight communities, and they have different ideas in all of these boxes. But it's really important when we're addressing things like climate change and clean water and clean air that we're able to communicate in better ways. And as long as we stay in our silos here, we're not achieving effective resource management. And I think that we have to be really careful about our understanding of what each of these ends of the triangle have to offer. And we need to really importantly not start limiting each of these pieces of the triangle in the capacity to do good stewardship. I think we can do it better if we work together, and that would be through community science. I think science can be the place that we come together from each of these ends of the triangle to really create effective stewardship. And again, regulation does not equal stewardship. Stewardship is the combination of all of us in managing these shared resources. So we need a shared forum, and we need to recenter communities and community science and move beyond citizen science. We need to all be engaged in this kind of science. I think it's important because community science involves common sense, and it does not take a rocket scientist to see that these bottles of water are not something that we would want to drink. But these community members in Flint had to present these over and over and over and over again to get any action, and that action was a scientist swooping in and providing information. That isn't how it should work. And so I think if we have community engaging in science with the rest of the parts of this triangle, we get stronger communities, organized communities, which are better equipped to advocate for shared resource management and better able to shift culture and address sources of inequitable access to these resources. I think that also could result in better science. It could be science informed by community interest and fueled by community participation. It will build trust again, and it will help shift cultural norms. Because honestly, communities ask the best scientific questions and they bring creativity to the process. Here's proof. Community has ideas about what science can do. And when science can't deliver, they are disappointed. And even though this is a bit of a joke here, I really enjoyed this. I think the same could be true for many communities that are trying to work with scientists right now in the watershed. It's hard because science takes a long time. Also, it's hard because scientists, we need to work our way back to understanding how to be involved in communities and what sort of science is actually helpful to communities. And then I think also if we're all working on community science, it makes better decision makers and definitely supports better decisions. Also, importantly, if you do this work and we truly have community science, the policy that is made to support what we found will be something that the entire community, who are voters and taxpayers, will be behind for the long term. So the challenge is, how do we do this? How do we collaborate? How do we make this real? And I'm going to tell you right now, I don't know for sure. This is something that I'm in the midst of it with all of you trying to figure out. But here's what I think, is that maybe if we were fundamentally able to reorient our science in the Hudson Valley, our regulatory work in the Hudson Valley, and our stewardship efforts in the Hudson Valley to address issues of environmental racism specifically, we might be able to cut through all of this and actually get something done. If we were to centralize and support environmental justice as opposed to environmental conservation, we would then be required to have all voices at the table, which is what we're all trying to do anyway. And the end result, which would be healthy people and healthy water and air, would potentially be far better. And importantly, it would be defensible in the long term. Also, again, there's already a comprehensive roadmap for this. I'm not asking us to do something that really generous folks haven't supplied us with information on how to do. And that would be the HAMES principles, which are developed in the 90s by a coalition of environmental justice leaders to give guidance to largely white environmental and globalism, anti-globalism, anti-globalization activists. And those are very simple, but they are powerful, and they are tough principles to live up to. Be inclusive, bottom-up organizing, let people speak for themselves, work together in solidarity and mutuality, build just relationships among ourselves, and a commitment to transformation. These are principles that we all, I think, could adopt and work towards together. We will make mistakes. Definitely, we won't always agree, definitely, but that is a way forward. And then I also want to leave you with Barbara Love's, this is a really powerful diagram showing that once you're aware of these things, once you make this decision to move in a different direction, you don't immediately take action. We have to take a step back. We have to do analysis. We have to do self-education. We have to figure out who are we actually accountable to, and then you take action.
Eli, we have about 15 minutes.
Okay, so what I want to tell you about here is kind of how BARD has kind of jumped into the middle of this to try to actually address some of this, and we would love people's help. We would love input to make it better. So we have the Center for the Study of Land, Air, and Water, and we have the Environmental and Urban Studies program. Both of those have centralized environmental racism and environmental justice. We have collaborations with the Saw Kill Watershed Community, which is an amazing collaboration. We participate as an institution. BARD is an institution as a community member. We also provide resources, which include tools, time, people, experts, and access to funding. And we also function as an academic community builder. These are things that are new to BARD, but I think are really helping us be part of working towards healthy people and a healthy planet. The Saw Kill Watershed Community is an amazing group. Please look them up if you haven't been engaged with them already. And this is a neat thing that came out of it. We were looking at our sub-basins, and Bob Wills of Dutchess County are asked if watersheds were a new way to think about neighborhoods. Again, community, building community. The questions that the community asked, scientific questions, were not actually the questions that I was interested in necessarily as a research scientist, but these questions I've been guided by for the last 6 years and have really opened up my eyes and expanded my capacity to make a difference in water quality. I think the most important one is that we asked, is our drinking water protected sufficiently? This has actually allowed us to access a much broader community when we think about water stewardship. We also have looked at the long history. There's a long history of community caring. We haven't gone back as far in time as we need to, and that's our next step. But we have looked back in the 70s around data that were created by communities. We've also taken time with students and those community members to analyze those data, to see what we can learn. We also, as a community, go out and do regular water quality monitoring. And this is something I think that is on the minds of a lot of us. We've been doing this water quality monitoring. What do we do with those data? We also have developed some tools that will allow community members to do more science. One thing we're developing with some really ambitious graduate school and PhD students in other institutions is what we're calling what is called the planktoscope, which allows you with this little machine here to take a look at the microscopic organisms in your water. This is a great tool to early warning sign around algal blooms, for instance. We are still learning. I want to be clear about that. We are still learning, and we're not really sure how this is all going to work. And we're really trying hard to build this notion of community science, because I want to leave you with this. It's not rocket science, what we're doing, what we're trying to protect the water from. In the 1930s, this is what the Sewage Works Journal. So the people that were creating the Sewage Works, this is what they knew would happen to our water, the influence that sewage would have on the water: excessive bacterial pollution, over depletion of dissolved oxygen, and the presence of specific substances which may exercise toxic effects. Emerging contaminants, maybe. So this is something that we know. This is not rocket science, and it's something that we can act on. It's actually common sense. I'm not going to have time to talk about my air stuff in detail, but that's okay. But you can take a look at these slides. They will be available, or this will be recorded, I guess, available. But I want you to think a little bit about miasma theory. This is something that happened in the 1800s and was championed by Florence Nightingale. Miasma theory was all about how water, land, and air, if they were contaminated, could cause sickness. They were wrong in terms of what caused the sickness. Louis Pasteur came in and got rid of it all and made us all really focused on human-to-human sickness. But in doing that, we lost this concept of us needing clean environment in order to be healthy. I think it's time, far past time, that we go back to that. And the easiest way is through addressing environmental racism. When we think about COVID, and I know it's changed all of our lives, we also know that EPA regulations have been really ransacked during this time. And the problem with that is that the people who are already dying faster because of the unclean environments that they have been forced to experience, we know that these ransacking these regulations will affect them again as well. And so I think COVID is kind of a wake-up call to us that water and air are things we really need to work on. So we also are doing community science around that and air monitoring. We've built some buckets that are based on work that communities in Louisiana and across the southern coast have used to try to protect their communities. And we're starting to distribute air monitors. So that is because air and water are connected. Fundamentally, the water that is in our watersheds comes from the air. And the problem with climate change is that it's going to change the amount of water that's on the ground versus the water in the air. The water in the air is going to increase. And I'm gonna, I promise I'm gonna end here, which is that we do live on a water planet, but that water is not just on the ground or flowing through our tributaries or flowing through the river or into the ocean. That water is also in the air, and climate change dictates that more of that water will stay in the air in some regions and less of it will fall out onto the ground. We need to be aware of this and carefully planning around it. It's important to understand also that there are rivers everywhere. We have our Hudson River, but there are also atmospheric rivers. This is a picture of water vapor and its movement around the globe. And we call those atmospheric rivers. And we need to be thinking about our river, but also the rivers that are in the air. And this tweet, I think, was really important. This is about privatizing our shared resources, and it's something to be very, very careful of. You better believe if there's more water in the air, that air will be privatized in some way. And we need to be aware of that and protect the amazing resource that we have. Water is important for humans. It is also becoming something that makes money. And we need to be very careful in the Hudson Valley to protect ourselves from the eventual encroachment of water industry trying to get that water. So I'm going to leave you with this, and I was going to open it up for some questions. Thank you so much for your time and your patience with me. And I humbly submit myself to your thoughts and questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Eli, for your presentation. Reminder, if you have questions for Eli, please put them into the Q&A box that's below. That helps me track them a little bit more easily than the chat. But we did have one question come in the chat from Simon. Have you studied how biophilia, which E.O. Wilson and others have articulated as an innate affinity and love for nature and people, relates to the ideas you're discussing? He says, for me, this approach recognizes that as people come to feel that all living things are part of our own community, we can become more effective at caring for our shared environment.
That's a great question. I have to admit, I have not had as much time as I would like to devote to E.O. Wilson yet. Hopefully I can do that when I get sabbatical. But this notion of relating to nature and the importance of us relating to nature and helping us to understand interconnectedness is an important one. But I would say that until we have figured out how to actually connect with our own species, we probably aren't able to fully connect with species outside of ourselves. So for me, it is, and I will admit, and this is me, it is far easier for me to hug a tree. And gosh, when I see a good beech tree, I really just want to hug the heck out of it. When I see a redwood, yes, it's far easier for me to hug a tree than to hug humans. You know, it's complicated. And so working things out with other humans is a lot tougher. And I think sometimes we confuse an affinity with nature with an affinity with life. And so without getting too, going down too weird a road, I would challenge us to understand that it is important for all of us to be connected with nature. And I'm not saying that isn't important, but I do think we're kind of missing the entire point when we focus on nature to the exclusion of the people, the real people who should be involved in the decisions we make around conserving that nature.
Great, thank you. Here's another question. The tire ingredient 6-ppd quinone, don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, has been reported in the Science Journal to be killing salmon where there is rainwater runoff from parking lots. What do we know about the toxic 6-ppd quinone runoff from parking lots in the Hudson Valley and its impacts on fish in the Hudson?
That is a really great question. And what I can tell you is I don't know anything yet, but that's a place that we can devote some time and energy into looking at. That's important. I think that when we've been thinking about runoff, mostly we've been thinking about salts and those additions of salts into the water around here, which is important as well. But there is a long list of contaminants that we should be keeping our eye on. That's one of them. I think also rubbers and rubberized components that are coming from tires are also a really important thing, and that may be connected actually now that I say that. But yes, those are important things to consider because those end up in our water as well. It's not good for humans to be drinking that. What's good for the salmon is good for the people, and I think that's an important piece. I will be writing that down, and I'll see what I can do.
Great, thank you. Can you talk a little bit about how you start to build relationships with communities that you may not have traditionally worked with?
That's a really good question. And that part that I said about hugging trees more than people is definitely something I struggle with. The ways that I have made connections outside of my community are through first some really intensive self-education, and then some deep thinking around what I have to offer to folks that I'm reaching out to. Then I try to find connections to that person, just like any other connection that you're trying to make. See if there are ways that I could make it so it's not a cold call. And then in the end, if I have to, I do a cold call. And I've gotten pretty used to making cold calls and not hearing back and having to do it several times. You know, one of the things that when we talk about trust, one of the things that I, as a white male scientist, I need to prove that I'm not just there to suck other people's time up. I need to prove that I actually am there to offer something in exchange. And if that's time, so I can't walk up to a community and say, I'm building a lightsaber, for instance, and expect some response. I need to walk up to a community and say, even though I'm an environmental microbiologist, I am trying to figure out how to measure PFOS. you know, I'm doing my best here. You know, I am going to do that. I can't expect a response unless I actually can prove that I'm not there just to take up time and energy. And that's something that I really have to work on to understand. I may not mean to be sucking up people's energy and time. I may not mean to look as unself-educated as I am. And so it really takes me sitting down and trying to figure out what I can do proactively to make those connections. We have to build trust. Trust isn't easy. And it's been broken in some pretty violent ways in some cases.
I think we have time for one more question.
Okay, great. So I'm going to take this hard-hitting question here. Some might argue that thinking about humans first is exactly what has resulted in all of our environmental problems. Is this a valid point?
I think it's as I said, it's a very, very complicated thing, right? But we have to, when we think about humans and think about thinking only about other humans, there are different ways of doing that. And I think that the case that is being asked about is actually based more on power, privilege, and capitalism. And the ways that we think about money and monetizing resources. Without those things, thinking about each other can only result in a cleaner environment. And am I saying overthrow capitalism? Not on this forum, maybe, but I'm not trying to be unrealistic here. We have to be really aware, and that's really what it means to do a power analysis and be strategic. We have to be aware of all the different things that are right now informing our decisions, because I think many of them are wrong. And so the way that we think about other humans right now might be wrong. It might be limited, and our limited experience, it might be limited by our culture, by our privilege, by our access to money. We really have to be aware of those things, because we may think we're thinking about other humans, but it might be in a way that is destructive. And I would submit it is. We need to rethink our understanding of what it means to have equal access to clean water and clean air.
Eli, that's powerful. I think when you and I first spoke, I was expecting a talk today with a little more about planktoscopes and people in streams and some data plots. And you have raised this dialogue to a meta level, which is important and fascinating. And as I think about the mission of the Watershed Alliance, which is to build bridges between people who care and who are working on these issues, you've made a very persuasive case today. So I'm trying to pull all the pieces together here with what's a warm thank you. Emily, do you have any other closing comments?
Just thanks, Eli, for your talk, and thanks to everyone who was with us this morning for tuning in, for asking good questions, and being a part of our broader Hudson River Watershed Alliance community. We really appreciate everyone's time and participation, and are excited to think about how we might be incorporating more of these kinds of philosophies into our work in 2021. So I want to wish everyone a very happy holiday season. Please stay well, stay safe, and we'll be back in January with our regular monthly breakfast lecture series.
Thank you so much. It was an honor, and I look forward to engaging with each and every one of you at some point around this. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Bye-bye.